What is truth, and how do we find truth in a world of deception? Are there biblical truths about our world and our lives that we can trust? And who are the key players in the end times? What does the Bible say about the Middle East, Iran, China, and Russia? And is there proof for what Scripture says? What do recent archaeological exploration tell us about the Bible? Who were the Anunnaki? What are angels, demons, and the Nephilims? Will the Nephilims return? Are there interdimensional beings, and how do they relate to the Bible? Stick around as we dive into Scripture for more answers in this episode of Mission Truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mission Truth in an undisclosed location so that you can't come find us when you want to disagree with us. So today on Mission Truth, less silly. I am your host, Trevor, along with my partner in crime, Nick here. And as usual with all of our Mission Truth episodes, we kind of start with a statement and we go on and either approve or disprove the statement based on our truth scale.
So you want to tell them what we're going to be talking about for like the next 6 episodes or so?
Yeah. So we're kind of going, the last couple episodes, we kind of went a different direction. And now we're diving back deep into historical and biblical kind of areas. And what we're going to be talking about is the Exodus. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and say our statement for today. Yep. And basically our statement is the Bible is wrong about the Exodus.
You said that?
No, that's what we agreed on saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying that's what our statement we're going to prove or disprove today.
Oh, okay. And of course, you were literally saying it was wrong.
I hope not, but there are a lot of people who think it is. So just briefly, the Exodus, what we're talking about here is the children of Israel during a time of famine went to Egypt. And then after that time, they left Egypt, and you had the whole Exodus where you had the plagues that hit Egypt, and they ran away from Pharaoh and had the crossing of the Red Sea and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before they entered the Promised Land. That's the brief history of what the Exodus is.
A very brief history.
If you need the Cliff Notes, I can give you some more information.
Or just go read Exodus.
Or just go read Exodus.
Well, actually, you have to read part of Genesis.
Part of Genesis,
too, right?
It actually starts in Genesis. But anyway. We won't get too much into that, but we're going to get into the statement of the Bible is wrong about the Exodus. Of course, that's where I get the story of Exodus from. But you also have a lot of people that look at historical data and say, well, no, this couldn't have happened and this couldn't have happened and this couldn't happen based on what they have found.
Yeah.
So, Nick, when we're looking at the story of Exodus, whereabouts are we looking to get our information, or what do secular archaeologists, where do they kind of get their information from?
So when you look at the story of the Exodus, it takes place mostly in Egypt, right? And so archaeologists typically look at Egyptian records and Egyptian archaeology, and to some degree Mesopotamian, which is kind of the Canaan area,
like the Fertile Crescent
between the Euphrates and the what's the other one, Tigris River.
Yes.
And so they're really kind of digging during that time, and if they're looking for the Exodus, they're usually looking in a time period somewhere between 1200 AD and maybe 1500. BC, 1200 BC and 1500
and
BC.
where do they get those dates from?
So the funny, I guess we should probably go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the viewpoints of the Exodus. Now, depending on who you ask, a lot of your mainline scholars actually don't believe that the Exodus is a real event,
right?
That it didn't actually happen, that it's a story that was made up, not necessarily out of thin air, but maybe there had been a small amount of people from that, crossed over, Israelites, we'll just say, that lived in Egypt for a while and then sort of migrated over into the land of Canaan. And then this sort of legend grew up around it. And there's a couple of reasons that they had to take that viewpoint. And we can talk about them briefly. The first is that from a record standpoint, Egypt is fairly silent about any at least from a written record standpoint, any existence of the Israeli people within Egypt during that time, and certainly any reference to some sort of mass exodus.
And of course, one of the things I read up on when it comes to that, as far as Egypt not actually having any written record, we still don't have a fully functioning understanding of hieroglyphs. Now, we had the Rosetta Stone that gave us an understanding of what it is, and they're still trying to learn how to read hieroglyphs. The other thing that it could have possibly been is that what I learned is that the Egyptian pharaohs didn't want to talk about history where they did something wrong or something bad happened. So you don't find it in their history at all. Which leads to, you were talking about the range of dates that you're talking about. So I actually read that there were 6 different archaeologists that were referenced in a book I was looking at. And between the 6 of them, it was basically 1,100 years in difference in their dating because of the way that Egypt actually had records of their dates. Yeah.
And I don't want to misconstrue it as if there's no record of Semitic people being in the land. There's a lot of archaeological evidence, as we'll see, that there were Semitic people, and that is people from Mesopotamia that were in Egypt. They just weren't identified as the Israelites, and there was no record of them in a mass migration out of Egypt within the Egyptian records. So another thing is they've done some minor looking around the Sinai Peninsula, and the mainline scholars seem to agree that there's been no real evidence of a people wandering. But then you have to ask the question, well, that's what, 3,000 years ago? Over 3,000 years ago?
3,000 years ago.
I mean, if they're living in tents, what are you going to find? Because there is, and we'll talk about this later, there is evidence of people being in that area during that time period. There's just no direct evidence. In other words, we do have writings, or I guess drawings are probably a more accurate description, maybe, considering it's hieroglyphs. In that area, there's just no major settlement, and there's no evidence of major settlements, which, is not actually surprising.
And of course, it's debatable that if they even wandered around the Sinai Peninsula or wandered in other parts of the wilderness in that area, which we're going to probably get into in another episode. And then
there's some pointing to the fact that Canaanite culture seems to be pretty stable in Canaan during that time period. In other words, there's not a ton of evidence of a lot of shift in cultural, things like pottery and the way they build houses and stuff. So they kind of look at that and say, the Exodus probably didn't happen. There's also something called what we call the late date of the Exodus, which is probably for those that mainline scholars that would say that the Exodus was a real event. They typically hold to this timeline, and the early date is somewhere right around 1250 BC. This would be during the time of Ramses, which is the one from Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments. That's the one we see. And the reason they kind of put it there is because the Bible identifies the city that they left as the city of Ramses. And there's some issues, I guess, so a lot of scholars believe that because Ramses didn't exist until Ramses came along, the city was actually named after him.
Right.
That likely the Exodus at least had to happen during or after the reign of Ramses. And there's some ways to deal with that we'll talk about in a minute. I'm trying to think. So we'll get into 1 Kings 6:1 in a minute. There's also some of the Amarna letters that refer to a people that some people believe is Israel, that occurred during this time. So, but that's not really well substantiated. There's also some late destruction layers in some of the cities of what would have been the conquest, that a lot of them tie to the conquest that occurred in that kind of what would be considered the late 13th century, early 1200s.
And you're talking about the conquest.
So like Jericho. Well, I don't know
Canaan.
if Jericho specifically, but like I'm trying to remember. It's like Zor and a couple of the others. There's some late destruction layers. In other words, what happens a lot of times when you dig up these cities is there's multiple destruction layers where these cities have been conquered, burned down, and rebuilt.
Right.
And so one of the ways they date these kind of events is by finding the destruction layers, and they date those by the pottery that they find within the destruction layers.
And of course, you're talking about now we've moved out of Egypt, and you're talking more around the Canaan area, Israel area, Jordan area, that kind of area there as far as the destruction.
And so I think the linchpin for this view really comes down to the name of the city of Ramses, because
and that's the late date.
That's the late date.
Yes,
it's the early number, 1200.
Yeah,
but it's the late date because we're going backwards because we're in BC.
Yeah.
So most scholars would look at the biblical account and say, okay, the Bible names Ramses, so therefore it has to be at least from Ramses or later in time.
Right.
And then there's the biblical date for the Exodus, which is called the early date. And it occurs right around 14. It's actually very exact because it's calculated a specific way. It's 1446 BC. I just typically say around 1450, but it's calculated primarily off of what's in 1 Kings chapter 6 verses 1, which says that actually the Exodus happened 480 years before the fourth year
of Solomon's reign. When he started building the temple.
And so all they do is there's an established date for that, which is like, I have it in my notes. It's like 900 and
well, they can establish that date because they know when the temple was destroyed, thanks to King Nebuchadnezzar, and they kind of go backwards from
that. And there's some other passages within the Bible that actually sort of corroborate that date.
Right.
And so it's pretty well established from a biblical standpoint that the Exodus happened right around 1450 BC. And the people who hold to the late date kind of get around that by sort of allegorizing this 480 years as sort of it's 12 divided by what? That's 4. So it's an idealized number. It's not a true number. It's like an allegorical number. But like I said, there's multiple places within the Bible that sort of point back to this time period. And so the question really becomes do we have evidence of the Israelites in that part of the world during that time?
And the other question is why is that important? So why is getting the correct dates important to actually proving that the Exodus probably happened?
Well, because of the limited amount of information that we have from just general from that time period, we need to take a lot of different points of data and kind of be able to put them in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, because there's not going to be
to build a case, because we're not going to have one source that's going to say, hey, these guys were here and this is what happened.
And there's not a lot of physical evidence left because it's so old.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things now. I think from an archaeological standpoint, we're going to talk about this over the next few episodes. I think that the early date, the biblical date, actually has the most archaeological and historical support for it. And I think what has happened largely is because because of this Ramses question,
right?
The majority of the scholars have made a presupposition that the late date is the only real possible date for the Exodus. And so when they start looking for Israel for proof of, or looking for evidence of the Exodus in the 13th century, which is around 1250. I say that because it gets confusing when you start saying that. They're not finding anything. But if the biblical date is correct, Israel had already had left the land for 200 years previous to that.
Right.
So let's talk about the Ramses question. What was the name of the city before it was named?
Now you had
Ramses?
told me this, and I cannot remember.
The name of the city was Avaris.
There we go.
And it existed. I don't know when exactly it was, when it was like founded or built, but it was one of the king cities in the Delta.
The Nile Delta.
The Nile Delta.
Yes.
And it's actually, I think the king's palace was there at one point, or one of his palaces was there. But up through the time of Ramses, it was actually named Avaris. And so one of the things that the early date folks point out is that oftentimes when we're writing for a contemporary audience, we will use contemporary terminology to describe places and things that happened in the past.
Right.
We live in the woods, but we're close to Atlanta. We're not too terrible. We're not really in that much.
So we say.
But do you know what the original name of Atlanta was before it became Atlanta?
Terminus.
Terminus. If everybody, for those of y'all that are Walking Dead fans, you might recognize that.
I'm not awake.
Why was it named Terminus?
That's because all of the railroads.
All the railroads came here. So before the Civil War, I don't really remember exactly when Atlanta got its official name as Atlanta, but it was known as Terminus. But if we were going to go back and talk about events that happened before Atlanta was named Atlanta, what term would we probably use if we're talking to an audience that has no idea about the history of Atlanta?
We call it Atlanta.
We would call it Atlanta. This is a common thing that's done. There's scribal updating that occurs in the copying process that helps newer people understand where some of these things that were lost to time. You're dealing with a highly oral culture back then. So there wasn't a lot of written information about these places, but they knew where Ramses was. And so probably what happened is somewhere along the way, it got updated to Ramses, because that's where people knew where it was.
I think is when they translated the Septuagint to Greek.
Yeah.
I think that's when it happened.
It could have been. And I don't know if is there a record of, I don't think that we don't have a record in the Dead Sea Scrolls that precede this.
I don't think so. Nothing comes to my mind.
But I mean, you're talking about
research on that.
1,000 years before Christ.
Yes.
So somewhere along the way, it could have very well gotten changed. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of evidence, and we're going to go through a bunch of it. But let's go back to the, let's bring up the Merneptah stele. This is probably one of the linchpins. The Merneptah stele was found in Egypt.
Now, explain what a stele is.
So a stele is basically, it looks a lot like a really large gravestone, but it has nothing to do with graves. It's basically a record. It's almost like propaganda, or like these kings would put them up. Like there's the famous dream stele, which we're going to talk about in a couple of episodes, that exists in between the legs of the Sphinx.
Right.
And that was actually, I won't get into that because I don't remember the details. I'm not going to fresh, but it's basically like, in this case, he's Merneptah, who was the Pharaoh at the time that this was built, is basically bragging about all the people that he's conquered. And he goes through a list of them. And at the very bottom, he actually lists this name of these people. And it doesn't say Hebrews, but it has an etymology that pretty much all scholars have agreed that he is talking about the Hebrew people. And this stele dates to about 1210. And the issue is that, so if you take the late date, which is 1250, they're wandering in the wilderness until about 1210. Well, they're not getting established into the promised land until probably the mid 12th century, 1150.
Right.
They're already a large people group during this time. So the 1210 Merneptah stele seems to indicate that they are already in the land. And the interesting thing is the term it uses, it has multiple kingdoms above it, and it uses the term for king, but it doesn't use the term king for the people that are in the land.
Right.
Well, 1210 is smack in the middle of the Judges period. So it's in the period of time between when they came into the land and when they became a kingdom under Saul, when they actually had a king.
Yeah.
And so this fits very well with the biblical story in terms of, we have an established Hebrew Israel /Israel nation in the land of Canaan. during the early part of the 13th century. So that sort of negates the idea that this late date of 1250 could be a possibility, because there's just not enough time for these people to get into the land.
Right.
So that was kind of the first one. There's also, let's go back to the destruction layers. We talked about there are late destruction layers, but there's also a lot of early destruction layers that actually meet this time period pretty good.
And we were talking about that earlier when he says destruction layers, like they literally think they found everything, and then they dig a little deeper and like, oh wait, there's more here. And of course, that's actually happening a lot in Egypt when they're doing these archaeological digs, where they will find evidence of what happened and they think that's all there is. But then I don't even know what occurs to them to dig a little bit deeper, and they dig a little bit deeper and they find something else, because just, people are building cities on top of cities. And you actually see evidence of that in Europe. When these cities have been raised throughout the medieval ages, you have cities that are built on top of cities, and there's got these, underground caverns and underground buildings. Kind of have it in Atlanta with underground Atlanta.
So there's 3 major cities that the Bible talks about being destroyed during the conquest. Those cities are Jericho, Ai, and Hazor, however you say it.
Yep.
All 3 of those cities show destruction layers that are dated to that time period. Now, Jericho's a funny one, because Kathleen Kennedy, when she first did it, had a different date, but they've gone back and done reanalysis of a lot of her work and some of the pottery. Right. They think that she actually dated it too late. And so there's some indication that
dating is not an exact science.
No,
a lot of it is pottery
Sometimes
based.
you just can't stand the person. I had to throw that one in
Kathleen
there. You kind of put that one on the tee for me.
I did. My apologies, but
so dating is an inexact science in history, because you're largely based off pottery records, which are kind of, they're useful, and they're very, I wouldn't say they're not. I wouldn't call them inaccurate. I would just say it's as much of an art as it is a science.
Yes.
And so, and then the last thing, which we're going to get into probably shortly a little bit more, is what they found in Avaris itself. There is actually a lot of evidence for Semitic people in Avaris from around I guess it would probably be around the 18th century or 17th century BC up until right around the beginning of the 15th century. So from about 1800 all the way up to right at about 1500 BC in Avaris. They have graves that they've dug up with skeletons that are. So one of the things that you can do to recognize a Semitic grave oftentimes is the Egyptians, they bury people more like what we're used to seeing, where you just lay them flat out in a coffin.
Yeah.
Typically, Semitic people are buried on their side, curled up more like a baby would curl,
right.
or like a person might sleep.
Right.
They're also typically buried with kosher animals a lot of times. So you'll see
no pigs.
And so they're actually able to identify. It's really funny because I can't remember the name of the major professor. They've got him on video talking about it, and they basically asked him the question, well, you've dug up Semitic people in Avaris. Why don't you believe the Exodus happened? And he basically says, well, they're just too early. They were here too early.
Because he's going
he thinks it's the 12, and he's dead now. I believe he's dead now.
That's considered the late date. Or no, the early date.
The early date is the biblical date of the Exodus, because it occurs earlier in time.
And he think it's the late date. Yeah, because we're doing BC.
And that's what's common with a lot of these archaeologists is they just will not consider anything apart from
they have the date,
that early date.
They have the date set in their mind, and they don't want to stray from it, unfortunately.
But there's also evidence, and we're going to talk about this. I think we have really good evidence for who the Pharaoh is. I think there's a lot of historical dates of the pharaohs and the reigns that are established by Egyptian chronology, not biblical scholars, but that fit with the time. And I think we even have a mummy that actually shows effects of one of the plagues,
So
which is a teaser for one of our future episodes. So we're going to get into who we think. We may even talk a little bit about if Moses has a record, or we can fight about that one.
well, he does have a record because he killed somebody and ran.
Well,
so
yeah,
just saying.
But so yeah, I mean, we're going to kind of get into it. I think do we want to go ahead and answer the question, or do we want to leave it to the end of the?
I think with this question, because basically the question was the Bible is wrong about the Exodus. That was our statement. It wasn't the question. That was our statement. And from what we were just talking about here, it's obvious that there's evidence that the Jewish people or a Semitic people were present in Egypt at that time period. Now, the one thing that we haven't really talked about is the evidence of them leaving. We kind of briefly touched on it because we were talking about the Sinai Peninsula and that, there's no evidence of that even happening, and that it's so long ago, even if there was that evidence, it wouldn't be there. So we're looking at historical records, and Egypt doesn't want to talk about it.
Nope.
But there's a lot of evidence that something happened.
Yeah.
So if we go by the history that we know, which is in the Bible, well, the Bible says it happened. From what we talked about right now, I don't know if we've given enough evidence to actually.
Yeah, I think we need to go through. So you'll have to wait. You have to go through the series.
They thought I was going to answer the question. I know they did, but we're going to wait till the next episode.
Oh no, we're going to go wait till a few episodes.
Oh wow, Nick is really making you wait. So if you're angry, you can
send me the hateful emails. I don't read them anyway. So,
you can send the hate letters to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they're used to it.
They're used to it. They can handle it. So I guess at this point, we're going to wrap this episode up in a nice little bow for you to open up at another time to see exactly what our responses are going to be with this information. So again, I hope you liked the episode. I hope you were entertained. Hit like and subscribe. Please leave a comment. If you're mad at us, we still like comments.
Yeah.
And if you have some additional information you want to share, please do that as well. Agape TV.com. Live.com. AgapeTV.com.
Yeah.
And you can find us on YouTube as well. Click like and subscribe, and also look at some of our partner podcasts as well. And as we always end each episode, keep seeking the truth, and the truth will set you free. And we'll see you next time.